Good afternoon, listeners. Welcome to the Education Showroom's podcast. And our special guest this afternoon is Kelly Cox from Wavelength. Good afternoon, Kelly. Good to see you.
Hello.
Good to see you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for dialing in. Thank you for listening, whether you're on YouTube or whether you're on Spotify. And this topic, of course, must have captured your imagination for you to be joining us today, because we're going to be talking about the SEND reform, in particular, what the key changes may mean to your school, to your multi-academy trust. But of course, we've got 20 minutes. Kelly and I will be here for a fortnight talking to you and sharing our views and opinions and thoughts and feedback and all of the things. So this will be the longest podcast in the world, but we've got 20 minutes. So we're going to talk about certain specifics today. Kelly, good afternoon. It'd be lovely for the listeners to learn a little bit about yourself, your background, and a little tiny bit about Wavelength while we're here, if that's all right.
Yeah, cool. Well, thank you very much for having me. So my background's as a teacher. So I was a head of department and classroom teacher back in the day. And I did teach in kind of really tough state schools. So I used to teach in the sets with the most disadvantaged students. So most of them had special needs. I nearly always had a TA or an LSA in the classroom with me. And so after about 6 years, I got disheartened by the lack of impact that I felt like I was having in schools. So I moved into the EdTech sector. And so I thought I would help create resources and experiences that would help the schools and students and would help teachers like I had been. So for the past, it's actually nearly a decade, I've been working with three previous companies building up offerings for young people. So from anything from work experience and specialist industry events or workshops to entrepreneurial competitions, interview skills, and now for the last actually it's been quite a long time now, I've been working with Wavelength. Time just goes past so fast. And so with Wavelength Education, we are really focused on special educational needs. So it's really topical right at the moment. You mentioned at the start that we could be here forever talking about the SEND reform. Well, it took forever just to read the SEND reform and white paper, both of which were about, 120 pages. So yeah, really excited to have a little bit of a conversation about this and see where we fit in.
And I'm sure, Kelly, what I'd love to do, if this is all right with you, is let's make this the first of several, and we'll do little bits and bats as the reform evolves, as we get more learnings and feedback and experiences. We'll keep diving back to these podcasts and do a series, if you like.
Yeah, great idea, because we speak with a lot of schools, different levels of people in the school, the senior leaders, the Senkos and the teachers, and yeah, it's a real shock of what's going on at the moment.
Thank you, Kelly. And I think we'll dive into the first kind of question. Some say it would be an obvious question, but to me, it's for me to kind of get your experience, because you wear two hats. You've got the educator hat on that you wear for a long, long time, as you said, head of department in the classroom, but also from a supplier perspective, a product, a service helping schools, Mats, and teachers. So you've got kind of two hats to wear. What do you feel, so on a day-to-day basis, you've read the paper that's developed so far, what do you feel the key changes are as a part of that white paper?
Yeah, that is a very good question. And in our conversations with our schools and reading what's online, especially on LinkedIn, and actually I've been to a lot of conferences recently, and I've chatted to quite a few people. I really feel that the SEND reforms are not just about policy change, but about the system pressure kind of shifting onto schools and Mats. And that's what I was saying earlier, is like I'm a bit worried that this system pressure that's shifting is perhaps going a little bit unnoticed at the moment. We know that recent data is about 20% of children in England have special educational need or disability. That's 1 in 5 in our classrooms on average, 5% with an EHCP. So SEND is not a minority issue now, but it's a mainstream responsibility. And these the SEND reform and the white papers that's come out, they are quite lengthy. So I think the biggest challenge that the schools and Mats are facing will be around what I see as quite a complex system change. So, for example, there's the new rollout of the new tiered system, ISPs for all of the SEND children. Every school will have to have a specialist inclusion base. every school is going to have to be a partner or part of a cluster group with other SEND schools. So there's quite a lot of
Yeah.
complex change overall. So we could go
Yeah.
through a few of them if that would be helpful, or we can
Yeah,
look at them in bigger
that's
detail.
interesting. That you used the word pressure early on in that explanation, as in the pressures from the changes that will be put on schools and academies.
Yeah,
That's absolutely, I totally concur with that. It's already incredibly pressurized. The school and
yeah,
maths environments is already, you know, incredibly difficult. But to put more of everything on them, more
yeah,
accountability,
yeah,
more pressure, more demand on reporting, more demand on detail. It is very different. You know, it
yeah,
is
because
very, very different.
there's a real sense that the reforms are just asking much more of mainstream schools than they've ever done before.
Yeah,
So the question that we're
yeah,
really thinking about when I'm talking about with schools is like, do they think that the SEND reforms are genuinely about improving outcomes for pupils, or are
mm,
they just a way of shifting responsibility and risk onto mainstream school without the capacity to deliver? I know
yeah,
there's obviously a lot of talk and big numbers in the media about billions for this and billions for that, but
yeah,
how it kind of trickles down into the day to day, you can't just make a teacher bigger because
yeah,
you put more
absolutely.
money into the system. So,
Yeah,
but there is a lot of opportunity for, I think, for children to be supported from a lot earlier on in the system.
yes,
That
yeah,
is obviously what the government's going for.
yeah,
So we're not knocking that at all. That would be welcomed by everybody, I'm sure.
yeah. And I think I agree with that. I mean, one of the a part of the preparation that I've done to meet with you today for this podcast is, I've read through it, got my own kind of like miniature notes, and there's two things that stand out to me, and you've touched on one of them. The first one is identification at an earlier stage.
Yep.
Now, identification at an earlier stage, in theory, would mean that there would be more SEND diagnosed children because they've been screened and screened earlier. So if it's 1 in 5 currently, it could be 2 in 5 once this has started to develop and momentum's being built up. So those numbers, of course, the 1 in 5 will actually maybe 2 in 5, 3 in 5, and build in a
Yeah,
period of time.
that's true. But there is a flip side to that. So what the government seems like they're hoping is that we identify the children earlier on and we put in place processes and support systems for them. So then, as they progress through the system, their needs are not so needful
Yeah,
as they go on. So, yes, I agree with you that we would probably discover more children who've got special needs, but would that then be a bigger problem further down the line? Probably not. It's a bit like I actually heard someone say that I thought it was quite nice. When telescopes were discovered, it wasn't that there were any more stars in the sky. So it's the same with the
I like
SEN.
that.
Just because we discover more SEN children doesn't mean that they
Yes.
weren't already there.
Yeah, that's it. That's really interesting. I love that analogy. The
Mm.
second one is the word accountability,
Mm.
which
Right.
must be in that document more times than I've had hot meals in the last 12 months.
Yes.
And in particular, having schools and mats not box tick, so to speak, to say that this is done. They have something in place for this, but to actually make it a living and breathing thing, not just a box ticking, but to actually have accountability for documentation, high quality teaching, identification, all of those particular parts. And that really, really stood out to me, is to move away from you've got a tick list, A to Z, 1 to 10, whatever it may be, tick, 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 but to actually have evidence of each of these pieces of criteria being put in place. And that stood out for me too.
Yes. Although I will say that there is a lot of talk about more accountability, but there doesn't seem to be the mechanism to hold the schools accountable. So currently,
Interesting.
obviously, with our EHCP system, they are legally enforceable. What is written on there is tailored to the child and is legally enforceable. So if the parents or the schools don't feel like there's enough support there for the children, not getting what they're legally entitled to, there is a way that that can be challenged and parents can challenge that. But in the new system, as most of us now know, that won't be the system. And the individual support plans, the ISPs, they are not legally enforceable in the same way. So accountability is this word thrown around, but how it will play out in reality, I'm not that convinced. I
Interesting.
think that will be potential friction, a lot of friction between the schools and parents as they try to get this solved. And I don't think that's something our schools and MATs need is extra pressure, because before, obviously, that used to be, or that currently is, dealt with by the local authorities. But now, again, what we were saying is that that system pressure is now going to be moved onto the
Yeah.
schools, and they are the ones who are
Yeah.
going to have to be dealing with this.
Yeah.
I just think
Interesting.
it's a real pressure for them.
Yeah. What other big significant changes, adjustments do you think we should highlight today? What are the other things that you know, again, with that double hat, that double lens, teacher, educator, and working with Wavelength, the supplier, what kind of other big things stand out to you at this point?
So the tiered support that's coming in, so you've got universal, targeted, targeted plus, and specialist. So those of us who were around in 2014, so I was leading a department in Derbyshire at the time, we had the SEND reforms in 2014. So those of us that old will remember that, oh, funny enough, back in the day, we had school action plus, and SEND statements. So we've kind of gone round in a full circle. There's nothing new under the sun, as Solomon said. So it is a case of, this is a big change. Will it make a big impact? It's a big challenge because the pressure is on school staff to provide this robust, high quality offering of education to all students within the universal level. But you can't just, like we were saying earlier, you can't just expect that teachers will suddenly be able to do more. I mean, as far as I'm aware, all the teachers and all the schools that I know, they're already trying their best.
Yeah.
In every way possible. So it's tricky to envisage
Yeah.
how this extra robustness will just start to appear. So will the expectations, the hopeful expectations of this reform, will they happen? Or will the schools just kind of end up lagging behind because of lack of capacity? And there's talk of these new national inclusion standards.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we don't know what they're going to be yet. So that's another thing that schools have to wrap their head around. So I think that is a very big challenge that will be coming up. Again, it's about the pressure that schools will be facing with regards to time, with resource. You've got the ISPs are going to have to be for every child that has any special educational need or disability, or who's going to be doing them. Most likely our very hardworking, overworked Senkos are going to have to be doing this for every student. So where is this time and this energy going to come from? And we know that there's investment, and we know it's not happening straight away. We've got a few years before it comes in. But we've got another challenge where we've got Senkos, well, all the staff, but particularly the Senkos, trying to navigate two systems in parallel during this transition. And if I might add as well, because you asked, another big area that I think is a challenge for schools and MATs is that every educational setting is going to have a special inclusion unit. So again, these inclusion units will need extra teachers, specialists, TAs, a body who will be there with the children. And so everybody should be getting universal level education, and that should all be great. But then a child might move up and need this kind of extra support in the next level up, targeted or targeted plus. So you've got extra workload on staff as well, because they've got to make sure that the children in these inclusion units are actually included, because we know that Ofsted are really focused on this. And then the last point on that would probably be, it is great. I can't remember the name of it, the good hands or working hands or something like that. This idea that the government's got, where they're going to invest in outside specialists that will come to these inclusion units, like speech and language therapists, occupational therapists, child psychologists. They will be this group of wonderful people that will be able to come to these bases. But again, that has to be organised. It's just very complex for schools to be navigating their way through this.
Yeah. Just as a side comment, is just to go back to the early identification comment that we discussed a few minutes ago. We have seen at the Education Showroom in the last, I will say, 2 to 3 months, a huge amount of brand new products coming to the Education Showroom that are specifically designed for early identification of special educational needs, which is really interesting. And I'm not talking about necessarily like what Wavelength is, which is what we're going to come to shortly, is how the great way that Wavelength helps. But I'm talking about the identification of certain special educational needs. And I think that's really, really interesting because, of course, that's aligned with the release of the white paper.
Yes.
And it's like there is so much, new products coming into the market, or products that have existed which are now having new bolt-ons, new features, new functionality. But I'm not going to call it a surge, but a real interesting burst of new organizations on the scene saying to us, oh, we help schools, we can help them, help MATs, we can do this screening and that screening. It's really, really interesting. So we see it from both sides, experts like yourself, we see new organizations, we have the schools and the MATs. It's really interesting. And that early identification is really, really key because we're getting a lot of feedback from different angles. Let's have a chat about Wavelength, because obviously that I'm a huge fan of Wavelength in terms of the feedback that we have received, the impact, and it's wonderful. And I'd love for the listeners to be able to learn about Wavelength today. And if you'd like to just take those reins, that'd be wonderful.
I'll take the reins. I will just first of all give respect where it's due. So Josh and Jay are the brains behind the organization who create pretty much everything that we do, and I get the lovely job of talking to schools and MATs and making relationships and helping them with the product. So what Wavelength does is, if you imagine that you have your 30 children in front of you in the classroom, and the best way to teach those 30 children is for you to split yourself into 30 people and teach exactly as every single child likes. So the way you like to learn math is obviously different to the way that I like to learn. And even if it's just nuanced like that, teachers can't do that. So obviously that's a bit tricky. So what we have done is come up with a way of learning that suits each child's individual style. So we use AI not to replace the teachers, but the AI is really clever. It learns how the student learns, and then it puts in front of the student a snippet of explanation from a real teacher about that explains it in the way that the student likes to learn. So if you imagine we have a library of teachers all teaching how to do long multiplication, for example. So student starts doing long multiplication, and they say on the platform, it asks them, how are you doing? It says, I don't understand it. So computer goes, okay, and it finds a different way to explain it. What about this way? The student says, oh, I'm not sure. What about this way? Oh, I get it now. And so then the computer learns how the student likes to learn. So currently we are just working on maths programs because we were told that this is the biggest area. So maths and English, but actually there's a lot of really good English support programs out there, but there does seem to be quite a dearth of maths programs. There are some out there, as we know. So we've currently got 2 programs running. They're both for Key Stage 3. One is a foundations program, so it can be used with any student who just needs confidence in building back up the basics, or maybe they didn't have them in the first place for whatever reason. So again, for teachers that are thinking about the universal offering that's going to have to come in the future, how do we provide good quality education for all of our students? This is the type of program that would make sure everybody's at the same place. So actually one of our schools is going to be using it in September with all the year 7s that come up. All the year 7s come from different feeder schools, they're all at different levels. So they can all do this program for 4 weeks in whatever time they want to do it. It makes sure everybody's at the basics, because maths particularly is that subject where if you don't have the basics, everything builds on what you've already learned. It's very hard. And then the other program that we currently have running as well is particularly aimed at students with special needs or attention related needs, so ADHD or autism or any, again, it's not what they talk about, good teaching practice, inclusion works for everybody. So if it works for good practice, works for one student, it will work for every student, but we particularly aim this at students who have special needs. So again, it learns how they like to learn, and it's very low requirement, we don't want to kind of set off anybody's rejection sensitivity dysphoria. We don't want to be encouraging the students for their efforts, even if they don't get it right, but their efforts were rewarded. And yeah, so we have those 2 programs running, and we are hoping to branch out to obviously other key stages and then into other subjects. But at the moment, we've decided to focus on those 2.
No, and again, just listeners, what I can personally say is the impact that Wavelength is having, because we've been speaking to schools that are actually using Wavelength, is absolutely phenomenal. So I'd strongly recommend getting in touch with Kelly and learning a little bit more, asking a few questions, see if it's a product that you would like to consider trialing, piloting for your school. Kelly, what do they, let's say, what type of school would most benefit, if there is such a type of school that would most benefit for Wavelength, or a particular class that may benefit from Wavelength? What, just those specifics, who would benefit the most?
I think probably the best way to answer that is what has worked well in schools that have
Mm,
already used it. So this one school that I said is going to be using it in year 7, they did the similar thing where they took out all the children that they knew were struggling either with confidence or they just didn't have some basics. And then they ran it kind of like as a small group intervention, which is exactly actually what we need to be doing with Targeted and Targeted Plus in the new
yeah,
reforms. So they took these
yeah,
children out once or twice a week and they worked with them. So that works really well. And I think the reason why this would support a school is because you don't have to be a specialist to run Wavelength. The point is that we have all these real teachers who've taught in their own way in front of the children. We also work with a school that is purely online, which
mm,
again related to special needs, really important because you might have children that have got EBSA, emotionally based school avoidance. You've got students that have got medical issues, those who are on reduced timetables. Perhaps we have some autistic children who can't manage a full day in the way that school is currently set up for them. And so this online program, this online school is a really great resource for these children, and they used us for 6 weeks, and it was really helpful because the teacher who set the class their work was able to see in live time how the students were doing. And Wavelength also tracks the confidence levels of the children and how they're feeling at the time. So at any point, this teacher can jump in and be like, Ivan, I
yeah.
can see that actually you're really struggling here. But they're remote, but they get this feeling that they are there one-to-one with the children. So that's a couple of ways schools have really used Wavelength, and I do think it's helped their children. In fact, I did actually have some statistics here that I was going to tell you
Yeah,
from
please,
some of
yeah.
our recent school trial and school time. So after using this for 4 to 6 weeks, 4 times fewer students struggled with focus on maths. So therefore they had improved their focus on maths. It's really great. And students 1.5 times more were confident when they used Wavelength. And we know that even if you don't have rejection sensitivity dysphoria, nobody likes being wrong, and it's particularly hard when you're growing up. So if you make a mistake and it's just you and a computer, it's not embarrassing.
Yeah, yeah,
It's not so bad. So your confidence grows because you eventually get there. And 2 times the amount of students said that they enjoyed learning maths after, which I think for any maths teacher, that is often the goal, is just get them to understand how amazing maths is. Can they enjoy
yeah.
the subject? I don't know if you enjoyed it at school, but you should have had
Um,
wavelengths.
no comment. I wish I'd had Wavelength. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
that was
But no,
nice.
seriously, I mean, just that is a really, really good point, because I was thinking it's incredible, isn't it? You and I are talking to each other today, and
Yeah.
when I left secondary school, which was 1994, I didn't have anything. We had nothing like this as a school. But if I had Wavelength, and like you said, similar tools with similar strategies across other subjects, who knows would have happened?
That's
And
exactly it. There's nothing wrong with any of us that went to school in the 90s or before. It's just that there wasn't this understanding that our brains all work differently and this one size doesn't fit everybody. And
yeah,
now we have that understanding, but
yeah,
we don't have enough hands to put this into practice. And that's why, there are a lot of companies, like you were saying, that are trying to find ways to
yeah.
support the children.
I love the way that you articulated that Wavelength. It frames something in a particular way, and then it frames it again in a different way, and a different way, and a different way,
Until you get it.
until you get it, until it finds that sweet spot,
Yeah.
and the student goes, I get it. Now
And
that is pretty special.
yeah, and why that then becomes special is because when you're teaching a class of 30, you don't know when that child has got that click, especially with teenagers. I used to teach teenagers, you can't tell anything with their face.
Mhm.
But what Wavelength does is we have all of this data on a teacher dashboard, and then it starts to give clever reports into how the student's learning. where their areas of strength are, what type of learner they are, if they like to rush things or if they learn better by so on and so on. And then the teacher can gather this information and then plan better steps for the student. And that's really what any solution that a school or MAT needs, is to be able to give them the next steps for learning for that child.
Yeah, I love that. And listeners, I hope you'll be able to, you know, like I am, I'm listening to Kelly and I'm aligning Wavelength with the white paper.
Yeah.
And I'm aligning Wavelength with the key areas that I've read to prepare to this, thinking this is how it fits in. And that's where that's why we wanted Kelly to come and join us today. Is the conversation is not just about the white paper, it's about how the white paper will evolve and how products and services help and support the facilitation and the requirements of that paper. And it's becoming very, very clear with that alignment. And we've literally, like a little bit of salt, we've literally just touched the surface and sprinkled a little tiny bit of salt on the white paper topics today. Yeah, exactly. So what I will say is, to be continued. And in a few weeks' time or a month's time, let's jump back on, as we said at the beginning. Let's talk a little bit more about that white paper. We'll highlight and pull out a few extra additional areas that are on that paper that we haven't touched on today. And we'll talk about how Wavelength applies and complements that as well. So we just literally touched the surface today. But Kelly, thank you very much. How can the School of MAT leaders listening to the podcast, how can they get in touch with you today?
So our website is wavelength.org. And my email address is kelly@wavelength.org. And we are also going to be at the Schools and Academies show in May at the London Excel Centre, which is the biggest place I've ever been. So if anybody's going there in May, let us know. It'd be nice to catch up.
So wavelength.org.
Yep.
Schools and Academies show.
Yep.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Kelly. It's been a delight to have you as our special guest. Listeners, thank you as always for joining us. We hope that you've enjoyed this content as much as everything else, if not more. So thank you very much indeed. And I wish everybody a successful rest of the week. Kelly, thank you again.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, everyone.